Have you ever wondered what happened to Beren and Luthien after their story ended? I mean, they both died, they both came back from the dead, and then what? Maya, Gulvan and Melanine, and welcome to the 6th episode in the series explaining and breaking down Tolkien's epic First Age tale of the Silmaril of Doriath. Now, that Silmaril is going to be an all-important part of this episode. It is currently in possession of violent and treacherous dwarves who sacked the Sindar's capital city, murdered their king, and brought ruin to Doriath. But before getting back to what's going on with that story, I want to begin this episode in a different part of Beleriand with a different set of characters. What I'm going to talk about today really does serve as an awesome little sequel to the tale of Beren and Luthien. 38 years before the sack of Menegroth and the death of Mablung of the Heavy Hand, Beren met Lúthien in a hemlock glade. Shortly thereafter, Eleuthingol sent Beren on a quest to steal a Silmaril from Morgoth's crown, and the following year, with a lot of help from Lúthien, Beren succeeded. Unfortunately though, before escaping the Dark Lord's stronghold, the world's mightiest werewolf, Karkaroth, bit off his hand and swallowed the Silmaril that he had been holding. Not long after that, Karkaroth, who'd been driven to madness by the agony of the Silmaril burning his insides, came rampaging into Doriath, and Beren was among the 5 hunters who went out to bring him down. In that hunt, the werewolf was slain, but so too was Beren. While succumbing to his mortal wounds, he handed the reclaimed Silmaril to Eleuthingol, and then he died, and his spirit departed Beleriand to await judgment in the halls of Mandos, which Lúthien deemed unacceptable. In the year after her lover's death, she succumbed to grief and she died herself. Her spirit was also summoned to the halls of Mandos, and there she came face to face with Mandos himself, the keeper of the dead. She sang him a song, so beautiful, the immovable Mandos was indeed moved to pity. The laws of nature and fate and reality itself ceased to bind her and Beren. Unlike everyone who's ever lived before or after, except maybe Glorfindel and Gandalf the White, Beren and Lúthien were granted a second life together, a mortal life. A few short decades shared in Middle-earth before they are both doomed to endure the fate of men and depart the circles of the world, returning to Ilúvatar, to where their spirits came from. In the years that followed, Húrin Thalion had his children. Maedhros, son of Feanor, forged an alliance. The Nirnaeth Arnoediad was fought. Turin Turambarg did his thing. Nargothrond fell to the power of Glaurung. The woodmen of Brethiel succumbed to violence and infighting. Doriath was ruined by treacherous dwarves. But throughout all of that darkness and destruction and despair, far away, towards the southeastern edge of the map, Beren and Lúthien lived their second lives peacefully together, dwelling apart from all other mortals. They build their new home upon a green island called Tol Galen, amid the waters of the mighty river Adurant, the southernmost of the 7 rivers that make up the summery land of Osiriand. And there we are explicitly told no mortal men ever saw them or spoke to them again. But the local green elves of Osiriand, the Lyaquendi, did maintain some dealings with Beren and Lúthien, and they called this country surrounding their green island Dor Firn Iguina, the land of the dead that live. You might be thinking, if Beren is such a heroic person, why is he living such a quiet and peaceful life so far away from the action at a time when so much bad is happening? You know, Turin wouldn't just hang out in the summery south with his wife while glory and great deeds awaited elsewhere. Nor would Boromir, I don't think, nor would Éowyn, nor would Isildur, nor would a number of other great characters whom I enjoy very much. But Beren is different from all of them. He's already done his great deeds, and they've earned him a second life with Lúthien. She gave up her immortality to be with him. She sacrificed an eternity in Middle-earth for one short lifetime with the man she loves. She had so much potential, but she gave it away to be with Beren. If he left her and risked his life and prioritized being remembered for a whole host of other great deeds, would he not be betraying her sacrifice? I think the most powerful, illustrious, and honorable thing Beren could do with the rest of his life would be to love Lúthien, to make every fleeting day of her mortal life worth the cost that was paid for it. And love her he does. Within only 1 year of their returning to life, Beren and Luthien bring into the world their only child, the first of the Peredhil, the half-elves. He is the first and only being ever to exist that can claim they've got a Maya for a grandmother. His name is Dior, often referred to as the Fair. And I think he is one of the most underemphasized characters in the entire Silmarillion. With one very interesting but relatively unimportant exception: the only half-elven lineages we are ever told about in Middle-earth are an enormously profound part of this story. There is a reason why, for example, Elrond will be known as Elrond half-elven. There's a reason why his daughter, Arwen, is able to make the same choice Lúthien made and give up her immortality for Aragorn. And that reason begins with Dior Elukil, a child born of 3 worlds. On his father's side, he's descended from the chieftains of the Mannish house of Beor. On his mother's, he is heir to the High King of the Sindar, and his grandma is an offspring of Ilúvatar's thought. I feel like Dior often gets left off a lot of the, top 10 characters in the Silmarillion lists, and maybe there is a reasonable reason he has stiff competition, but this guy's potential is absolutely incredible. Dior could have been, and I think should have been, like Super Aragorn on steroids, considering the epicness of his origins. One could argue it is his birthright to be Middle-earth's coolest character. Anyway, a question I anticipate many of you may be wondering: did Dior inherit an immortal lifespan from his mother, or a mortal one from his father? Well, the truth is, Tolkien actually answers this question relatively unambiguously. In The Lost Road, he wrote, admittedly in reference to a different half-elf, "All those who have the blood of mortal men, in whatever part, great or small, are mortal, unless other doom be granted to them." And so it would thus appear, even though his mother was the Princess of Doriath, his grandfather was High King of the Sindar, and his grandmother came from the timeless halls outside of creation before the universe was made, just like his father, Dior the Fair is counted a mortal. Anyway, surely he must have had one of the loveliest childhoods in, the entire Legendarium. While the north and the east and the west of Beleriand were all falling under the dominion of Morgoth, on an island in a river in the warm and sunny south, Dior was raised by 2 of the most loving people in all the world, with nothing else to do but take care of their son and build a happy home for him to grow up in, free from darkness and from danger. We don't know anything about the specifics of Dior's early life, but we do know when he was 27, 1 year before Turin Turambar unwittingly married his own sister in Brethiel, Dior took a wife of his own, the daughter of Eleuthingol's great-nephew. Technically his second cousin, once removed, but I think we can let that slide, the niece of Lord Celeborn and later, by marriage, Galadriel, Lady Nimloth of Doriath. I would speculate Dior sometimes went on trips away from Tol Galen to go and visit his grandparents in Menegroth. I would suggest this is where he met and fell in love with his future wife, Nimloth. However, when their love blossomed into marriage, Lady Nimloth left her father and her uncle Celeborn and the rest of her friends and family in Doriath, and she went to dwell instead with her new husband, Dior, in the lands of Osiriand, close to the Green Isle where her in-laws, Beren and Luthien, now live. Dior and Nimloth's marital home is built beside a shimmering waterfall called Lúthien Lamath, the waterfall of echoing voices. And after 3 years living there, we're now in the same year that Húrin Thalion was finally released from Angband, Nimloth gave birth to twins. Beren and Luthien became grandparents. The sons of Dior and Nimloth were called Elured and Elurine, and when they were 3 years old, on a night when starlight glittered in the waterfall spray of Lúthien Lamath, Nimloth gave birth to a daughter called Elwing, which is Sindarin for star spray. I want to quickly point out, twins seem to run in this family. I don't want to rush ahead, but 2 of Dior's grandchildren will also be twins, and one of those twins will also go on to have a pair of twin sons himself, followed by a very important daughter. The exact same combination of children that Dior has. It's not a hugely important point, but it is, I think, interesting to consider nonetheless. Anyway, it's not often in the latter parts of the Silmarillion we get to enjoy happy days of love and peace and safety, but right here, that is exactly what we have. Beren and Luthien, Dior and Nimloth, Elured, Elurine and Elwing, as well as a number of Osiriand's green elves do all get to live, for a time at least, in this place of warmth and joy. Can we savor these good vibes for just a few seconds longer, for a little while? Far away from the rest of the action, there is harmony and merriment and loveliness. Beren and Luthien's golden years together. Until one day, when everything changed. In the very same year that little baby Elwing was born, an elvish messenger came to Tol Galen, a messenger from Doriath. And so, Beren and Luthien learned together what had befallen in Menegroth. Mablung is slain. The city is sacked, the Sindar are scattered, and the Silmaril is stolen. A great host of dwarves, armed for war, are marching east, back towards the Blue Mountains, and they are carrying the blood-soaked jewel that Beren and Luthien risked their lives to take from Morgoth's crown, that Beren died to give to Eleuthingol. And so, for the first time since coming back from the dead, Old Man Beren must leave Tol Galen. He must take a fighting company with him, and he must reclaim the Silmaril that's been plundered from the Sindar. If he delays, the dwarves of Nogrod will make it back to their mountainous mansions. The opportunity for justice will be lost. So Beren gathers many green elves of Osiriand, archers, hunters, and scouts, and he summons his son, Dior. Together, they all set out swiftly to intercept Doriath's assailants and to redress the violence that they have inflicted upon Lúthien's family and upon her people. Which segues us back over to that dwarven host from Nogrod. After slaying Marblung outside the doors of Eleuthingol's treasury, after stealing the Nauglamir along with a great deal of Doriath's gold to boot, and sacking their capital, the victorious dwarves, whose numbers are now depleted by violence, set off for home, out of the elvish woodland, over the river Aros, and into the wilds of East Beleriand. We don't know exactly how far these dwarves had to travel, but we are told Menegroth lies 150 leagues away from Angband, roughly 450 miles, and we can see from the map that Nogrod lies slightly further from Menegroth than Angband does. So I would suggest this is at least a 500-mile journey as the crow flies, just shy of the distance from the southernmost tip of Britain to the tippity top of Scotland, or if you're an American, roughly from New York City to Detroit. So, for a diminished company of heavily armed and armoured dwarves transporting a great hoard of stolen elvish gold through wild and unfriendly country with legs considerably shorter than the average person's, this is quite the undertaking. Even if they follow the ancient dwarf road of their ancestors, the remnant of Nogrod's fighting force must endure a multi-week-long expedition home. Eventually, though, under the command of their lord, who in early versions is called Naugladur but doesn't get a name in the Silmarillion, these dwarves make it all the way to the river Askar, the northernmost of the parallel rivers that make up the land of Ossiriand. And at the stony ford of Sarn Athrad, they attempt a crossing. They are so close to Nogrod, but the banks of this river are steep, the stolen elvish gold is cumbersome, and these weary dwarves are vulnerable. As the burdened warriors of Nogrod struggle to climb the slippery riverbank, they suddenly hear the most terrifying sound imaginable. The surrounding woodland is filled with the noise of elvish horns. The dwarves are attacked. They can't see their enemy, but they can see the arrows and shafts speeding from the trees towards them on every side. Many dwarves die where they stand. Others make a break for it and try to escape the ambush by fleeing up the steep slopes of Mount Dolmed, but a few band together, hold their ground, and fight back. One of whom is the Lord of Nogrod. He holds the Nauglamir. He instigated all of this violence, and in the Battle of Sarn Athrad, he faces Beren, son of Barahir, in a one-on-one duel to the death. I should point out, once again, this story was pieced together by Christopher Tolkien from loads and loads of different, contradictory, and on occasion straight-up irreconcilable notes, some of which were written as far back as 1917 when J.R.R. Tolkien was in his 20s, other parts come from the 1950s after The Lord of the Rings was published. This makes it pretty difficult, pretty much impossible really, to talk about what is and isn't canon. I think we need to adopt a more nuanced perspective than that. In those earliest writings, we are told that Beren and Naugladur's personal duel lasted for 3 whole hours. Then again, in those earliest writings, Thingol was called Tinwellent, Melian was called Gwendolen, and Doriath was called Artenor. Also, there was an elf called Ufethine, specifically a very wealthy gnome, who betrayed his people and joined the dwarves. None of this makes sense with the Silmarillion version, except maybe that Beren and the Lord of Nogrod did fight for 3 hours. However, in later writings, published in a section of the War of the Jewels called Other Writings Not Forming Part of the Quenta Silmarillion, Beren isn't even present for this battle. Instead, it was the 2 worst sons of Feanor, Celegorm and Curafine, who ambushed the dwarves at Sarn Athrad and fought the Lord of Nogrod. But in that later version, the dwarves don't even have the Silmaril. In that version, Melian gave it to Beren and Luthien before she departed, so Celegorm and Curufin don't really achieve anything except for anger and frustration and a whole load of dead dwarves, which also completely contradicts what's written in the Silmarillion. And just in case you're thinking, well, maybe Christopher Tolkien made a mistake by choosing the older version, where Beren takes the place of the nastiest sons of Fëanor, it's worth pointing out, over a decade after those War of the Jewels writings were penned, Tolkien wrote a letter to a fan, in which he told them, after Beren's return from the dead, he did not show himself among mortals again, except once. He intercepted a dwarf army that had descended from the mountains, sacked the realm of Doriath, and slain King Thingol, carrying off a great booty, including Thingol's necklace, upon which hung the Silmaril. So, there you go. In the last decade of his life, Tolkien definitely was back to imagining the older version of the story with Beren that Christopher Tolkien slotted into the Silmarillion. I don't say any of this to in any way undermine the story. I think this is awesome. I just want to remind everyone this isn't like a normal novel. The Silmarillion's chapter 23 is built out of fragments. There are alternate versions, and for that reason, I think it really feels much more like mythology than any given chapter from, for example, The Hobbit or The Lord of the Rings. Anyway, I will now go back to explaining things as they exist in the published Silmarillion. For an unknown amount of time, maybe 3 hours, Beren alone battles the Lord of Nogrod. It is the last fight he will ever take part in. Eventually, he is victorious. The Dwarf Lord is slain, and the Silmaril he stole, the Nauglamir, is taken back by Beren Erchamion. While imagining this moment, there's an interesting ambiguity that we all need to consider. Do we imagine Old Man Beren taking back the Silmaril with one hand, or with two? There isn't any obviously correct answer here, but whichever way we choose does reflect on how we imagine the specifics of Beren's resurrection. In his first life, his hand got bitten off by a werewolf. And then a few months later, the rest of his body got messed up again by the fangs and claws of that same werewolf. It was those wounds that killed him. So, was Beren's spirit, his Fëa, sent back into the same scarred and damaged body it originally occupied? Or was he given a brand new body for his second life? Honestly, the answer is we're never told. But I personally have a strong preference for the former. Beren went through hell to get that Silmaril and to earn the right to marry Lúthien, and I think it slightly undermines his journey if he gets some sparkly clean new body that doesn't reflect any of that. He sacrificed his hand. He became a disabled badass. I think he comes across as a much cooler and more memorable character if that sacrifice isn't undone when he returns from the dead. Also, Beren's most famous epithet, Erchamion, literally means one-handed. Wouldn't it be really weird if Beren Erchamion had two hands for like 99.9% of all his time in Middle-earth? The way I like to imagine it is that in her second life, Lúthien the Fair grows old and builds a family with her heavily scarred and physically maimed husband, whom she loves in totality regardless of his appearance. You know, theirs is not a union built on how conventionally attractive the other one is. It is arguably the most powerful romance ever to exist in the universe. You are, of course, free to disagree, but either way, we know for certain, after defeating the Lord of Nogrod, Beren wrested the Nauglamir from him. And for the third time in his life, he held the Silmaril that used to sit in Morgoth's crown. However, With his dying breath, the Lord of Nogrod laid a curse upon all the treasure his people had stolen from Doriath. Exactly what Mime the Petty Dwarf also did with his final words. It seems the greed and the hatred and the bloodshed that's followed this treasure all the way out of Nargothrond is going to be perpetuated again and bring untold misery to the next group of people who acquire it. Or at least it would, if Beren were not wise enough to know better. But he is. He stands upon the shore of the river Askar, and he lets its waters wash away all the blood from the Silmaril, the stain that lies upon the Nauglamir. Then, unlike the vast majority of characters in his situation, he does not claim the jewel for himself. Instead, he recognizes that with Thingol dead and Melian gone, the Silmaril belongs by right of inheritance to his wife, to Lúthien. And so, he decides to bear it back to Tol Galen as a gift for her. But the rest of Doriath's double dwarf cursed treasure, Beren feels no desire to hold on to. He lets all of it go. The stolen gold and the jewels of the Sindar are cast into the depths of the river Askar and drowned in its waters. And from this day forth, that river takes a new name. Rathloriel, the Golden Bed. However, although Beren's and Dior's and the Green Elves' work is done, this is not the end of the Battle of Sarn Athrad. Remember a moment ago when I mentioned some of the dwarves tried escaping up the steep slopes of Mount Dolmed? Well, those dwarves are pursued and hunted too, but not by elves, and not by men. As the very last survivors of Nogrod's once great army climb this mountain, they are waylaid by some of Beren's friends. In letter 247, Tolkien tells us that although Beren had no formal army, he did receive aid from the Ents. In that letter, Tolkien wrote, in the First Age, the Ents were less wise, less strong, and shyer than they would have been when Merry and Pippin met them 7,000 years later. But some of them, at least, were dwelling in the secret and mysterious wooded country of Osirion during the days of Beren and Luthien and Dior. We have no idea if Treebeard was among them. We do know he walked in Beleriand in the Elder Days, but we are not given any evidence to suggest he took part in this conflict with the dwarves, although we're also given no evidence to suggest that he didn't take part. All we know is that as the last of the dwarves climb the slopes of Mount Dolmed, as they near their mountain stronghold, the shepherds of the trees come forth, and they drive the dwarves into the nearby forest, from which no dwarf ever comes out again. And so, due to a union of men and elves and Ents, the entire fighting force that marched out from Nogrod to do war with Doriath is completely destroyed. And after this day, there is no love ever to be found again between dwarves and Ents. Or at least not until Legolas the elf asks the permission of Treebeard to bring his buddy Gimli into Fangorn Forest for a Middle-earth vacation after the events of The Lord of the Rings. Just as the friendship of Legolas and Gimli eventually redeems the relationship between the dwarves and the Sindar at the end of the Third Age, it also mends the grief that's grown between dwarves and Ents, too. Which I find particularly interesting because the race of dwarves are, of course, the children of Aule, the Valar of crafting. They are sort of the adopted middle children of Ilúvatar. But the race of Ents are the children of Yavanna. And Yavanna is the wife of Aule. The two races can be thought of as sort of step-siblings. They are to an extent the other's opposite, but they are also two sides of the same coin. I think that adds another layer of tragedy into this story. It's not about Ents taking vengeance on tree-felling orcs, nor is it about dwarves doing righteous battle with hateful trolls. This is a war within a family. And it does no one any good but the Dark Lord. Anyway, I'm going to finish this episode by following Beren and Dior and the Green Elves back south to their homes in Osiriand. Dior returns to his wife and his 3 young children in their home beside the waterfall of Lanthia Lamath, and Beren returns to Lúthien upon their green island. When he tells her what fate befell the dwarves, Lúthien is grieved, for she recognizes the sorrow that is bound up in every part of this tragedy. And presumably she remembers when her home in Menegroth was defined by friendship between elves and dwarves. But after all of that has fallen apart, after both races have suffered their violent catastrophes, the Silmaril is at least back with the couple who took it from Angband in the first place. Beren clasps the Nauglamir around Lúthien's neck, and it is sung that while she wears that immortal jewel, she becomes the vision of greatest beauty and glory that has ever been outside the realm of Valinor. For a little while, the land of the dead that live, Dorfirn Iguina, becomes like a vision of the land of the Valar. And no place has been since so fair, so fruitful, or so filled with light. Together, Beren and Lúthien and the Silmaril that defined their story create a mini Valinor in Middle-earth, on an island in a river, far away in the warm and summery south. It is astoundingly rare for one of these First Age Explained episodes to end on a happy note, but in this case, this one does. A lot of people suffer a lot of hardship, and we all know Beren and Luthien suffered more than their fair share 38 years ago. But after that, they also get to share a wonderful few years together, in peace and in harmony and in light. However, this is still definitely not the end of our Silmaril of Doriath series, and in the next episode I am going to talk all about the quest of Dior Elukil, the heir of Eluthingol, as he sets out to build a new Doriath, to resurrect the realm that was lost, and to rule it as the second king of his late grandfather's woodland kingdom. We will see the return of Menegroth. We will see the return of the Sindar. And because no one gets to be happy for long, we will also see the return of the sons of Feanor. Savor this happy moment. I promise you it will not last. But do make sure you don't miss that next installment in this series. Hit subscribe if you haven't already, and be sure to click like and leave a comment on this video if you want to. You can also now support the channel on Patreon or Ko-fi if you'd like to, so follow the links in the description to those pages if you are at all interested. However, until next time, as always, my dear friends, much love, stay groovy, and Navair Melanine.